Well, hey there, friends. I'm your host, Penny, and this is Criminally Nerdy. How goes it, my lovelies? I hope you're all having marvelous mornings, or afternoons, or evenings, whatever. The kiddos are out for summer break, so they are abuzz with excitement. I'm going to need a buzz of a different sort to deal with their energy, if you know what I'm saying. I'm just kidding. Kind of. In podcast world, the Indie Pride Festival is just days away, and I'll be there with bells on. And by bells, I mean a super cool Criminally Nerdy Pride shirt and lots of sunblock. If you see me, please feel free to grab a sticker or just say hi. Also, the podcast has made it to a few new spots and picked up a few new listeners. We've even made it up to Canada. I know you guys probably think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. I almost cried. Every time I see a new city or state or like or follow, it lights me up like you wouldn't believe. Knowing that the hard work I'm putting in with the research and putting this podcast together is actually getting to other crime nerds is just the best feeling in the world. So welcome new listeners, welcome back returning listeners, and just thank you all again for being the best. Maybe someday I won't gush over you guys at the top of every episode, but today is not that day. Just seriously, it truly means the world to me that you guys choose to spend a part of your day with me. And last things last, we're going to go ahead and keep outtakes contained to the end of the episode. It's fun to try new things, but just because something sounds good in theory doesn't mean it's going to work in practice. So, oh well, you live and you learn. Also, I'm sorry. I'm still getting over this cold. It's a little bit better than it was, but my voice is going to be what it's going to be. So don't get used to this deep raspiness. This episode is airing on June 3rd, which is Love Conquers All Day, World Bicycle Day, National Egg Day, and Insect Repellent Awareness Day. I swear I do not make these up. Call into work. Shield yourself from those pesky pets with some bug spray and take a bike ride with someone you love to a nice little breakfast cafe and treat yourself to an omelet. Or scramblies. Tell your boss I said whatever they've got going on can wait until tomorrow. You've got eggs to eat and insects to repel. Who isn't aware of insect repellent? It needs an awareness day. The case I have for you today is the heartbreaking true story that inspired the movie Soldier's Girl and sparked nationwide debate about the United States Army's controversial Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. This is the case of Barry Winchell. Some of my sources for this episode were the Queer Fears podcast, Beyond the Rainbow podcast, Vanity Fair, The Washington Post, and Rolling Stone magazine. Barry Winchell was born on August 31st, 1977 to Grant Winchell and Patricia Kudels, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, in Kansas City, Missouri. Barry enlisted in the United States Army in 1997. He left his family and high school sweetheart to head off for basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. By all accounts, he was well respected by his peers. After basic training, Barry was assigned to Fort Campbell, Kentucky as Private First Class, or E3, in 1998. Fort Campbell is the second largest U.S. military base. It is over 105,000 acres and sits on the Tennessee-Kentucky border. As of 2023, it was home to over 241,000 people, 30,000 of which are active service members. Barry served in the Delta Company of the 2nd Battalion of the 502nd Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Regiment, also nicknamed the Screaming Eagles. And no, I have no idea what any of that means. But Barry did. He studied military manuals, which was not easy for him. Barry had dyslexia, so reading could be a challenge. He never let it stop him, though. He loved being a soldier and aspired to be a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. He settled into the barracks he now called home and got to know his new roommate, 25-year-old Justin Fisher. Justin was a specialist, or E4, who grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. For the most part, Justin and Barry got along well, though they did have their occasional spat like most roommates will. The strain of trying to maintain a long-distance relationship wore on Barry's girlfriend back home. After 2 years, she broke up with him in a letter saying that she had found someone else. Fort Campbell wasn't far from Nashville. Soldiers would often head out to the bar scene there, including Barry's roomie. Now that Barry was 21 and single, he decided to tag along on one of their excursions. In March of 1999, Justin took Barry to The Connection in Nashville. The Connection was a gay bar that could host up to 2,000 people and held regular drag shows. Before we get much further, I want to put some things into context. Times were changing and gay rights were progressing, but the military wasn't one of those places where being out and proud was acceptable. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was enacted under the Clinton administration. It was a compromise policy meant to protect soldiers from discrimination based on their sexuality. There had previously been a complete ban on homosexuals serving in the United States military. Anyone who was discovered or suspected would be dishonorably discharged. While you still couldn't be openly gay in the military, you were not allowed to be asked about your sexual orientation. As long as they did not proclaim it, those who chose to serve and stay closeted in their professional life had a layer of protection. But it was also a catch-22, because if you faced discrimination, there wasn't much you could do about it, because any credible evidence of homosexuality would lead to being discharged. Unfortunately, the policy didn't protect servicemen and women as well as it was meant to, and it was eventually repealed, but we'll get to that. This information is not a comment on anyone's sexuality in this story, it's just to give you a feel for what was happening at the time. On the night that Justin tagged along with his roomie and some friends, Justin introduced him to one of his favorite performers, Calpurnia. 28-year-old Calpurnia Adams was a trans woman born in February 1971 in Nashville, Tennessee. She had served as a field combat medical specialist in the Navy during the Persian Gulf War. She came out as a transgender woman during her last year of service. She took her name from William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, whose wife's name was Calpurnia, and the tombstone shown in the movie The Addams Family. You could say there was an instant connection between Barry and Calpurnia that night. I'm sorry, I had to. Calpurnia had a feeling Justin was interested in her, but she didn't return the feeling. It was also kind of hard to tell who Justin was interested in, as he was known to be a heavy drinker who would get overly touchy with performers, making them uncomfortable. Barry and Calpurnia hit it off right away. They made a coffee date for the next day and began dating soon after. Calpurnia would say their relationship was the perfect mix of chemistry and passion. There was some question about how Justin felt about this. He seemed jealous, but it was hard to tell if he was jealous of Barry or of Calpurnia. Barry's mother recalls him telling her a strange story about how he woke up one night to Justin playing with his feet. No, bro. That's creepy as fuck. Justin's jealousy took a back seat for a short time when he asked Barry to have Calpurnia set him up with one of the other performers from the connection, Kimmy Sue Satin. Kimmy Sue enjoyed drag, but outside of the show was a cis gay man. Justin and Kimmy Sue did spend some time together, but what their time consisted of can only be left to the imagination. Things didn't last long with Kimmy, and Justin was back to stewing in his jealousy. Whether it be jealousy of either Barry or Calpurnia, or simply jealous of a happy couple, he lashed out by spreading rumors around the base that Barry was gay. Again, I must say, those in glass houses, honey. Others started harassing Barry, calling him names and continuing to spread the rumors. He was bothered on many levels. The first being that he considered himself to be straight, and Calpurnia straight because she identified as a woman. There have been rumors that he may have been questioning his sexuality, but as far as his relationship with Calpurnia went, he did not view it as a gay relationship. The second being that he couldn't report the harassment without risking an investigation, which could lead to him losing the job that he loved. The harassment reached one of Barry's commanding officers. And I want you guys to understand, when I say harassed, I mean this man was being terrorized by the other soldiers. They called him every kind of gay slur you can think of on a daily basis. Barry's performance as a soldier didn't miss a beat, but it was clear that he was suffering from the abuse. In direct violation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, his commander asked him about his sexuality. Barry denied the rumors and did not make a formal complaint. Now entering the chat is 18-year-old Calvin Glover. Calvin had a troubled past. His parents separated when he was young, and he'd been drinking since around the age of 13 when he moved in with his dad. He was usually found hanging out with an older crowd. He was flunking several classes when he dropped out of school in 8th grade. He joined the Army at the age of 17 with his mother's permission. After basic training, Calvin was stationed at Fort Campbell towards the end of March 1999, where he began hanging out with Justin. Calvin was very easily influenced by others. He was described as someone who tried very hard to impress others and was always seeking validation. He would tell wild stories about robbing people and stealing cars just to get attention. It is now July 1999. The barracks was abuzz. That's my buzzword for today. Get it? You get it. Anywho, There was a keg party on base and everyone was enjoying the celebration. During this party, Calvin was boasting about all the things he had done, with Justin there egging him on. They're both drunk and riling each other up, like folks can do. But Justin's intentions seemed focused on provoking Calvin to do something. Barry calls Calvin out on his stories and tells him to take his drunk ass to bed. Not sure if you know this about drunk people, but they don't like being told what to do, so this statement kinda pissed Calvin off. Tensions rose a little bit, but eventually Calvin shook it off. Wouldn't you know it, good old Justin decides now would be a good time to encourage Calvin to fight Barry, saying, "Bet you can't fight Barry right now. Those who stir the shit pot should be the first to lick the spoon, dickbag." You know, when I'm drunk, my friends don't encourage me to fight anyone. The worst they're gonna do is try to talk me into off-key karaoke. This Justin guy is not a top-tier friend. Calvin, already heated, takes it to heart and decides he's gonna try to step up to Barry. The two fight, if you want to call it that. It was more of a scuffle, with a drunken Calvin lunging at a far less intoxicated Barry, and Barry punching Calvin in the face, sending him to the ground. Calvin stormed away angrily, telling Barry that he was going to get him for this. The party dies down and everyone goes home to sleep it off. The next day, July 4th, Barry apologizes to Calvin for punching him in the face, and Calvin accepts. It's all good. Water under the bridge. Boys are weird. Speaking of, I need to know if anyone else has this problem. Everyone in my home who possesses a Y chromosome is incapable of closing the pantry door. It drives me cuckoo nuts bananas. They just leave it standing wide open all the time. Why? Why is this a thing? Please advise. Okay, back to the story. Amends have been made and they just head off to another day-long celebration. During this, fucking Justin is back, taunting Calvin for getting beaten up by Barry, which he didn't get beat up. He got punched and he left. Barry let it go. Calvin let it go. Everyone's moving on, but not Justin. He just cannot stop teasing Calvin about it. At first, Calvin just blows him off and goes on drinking, but when Justin goads him over and over about getting beaten up by the only F word I won't say, it really gets under Calvin's skin. The company had an Australian Shepherd dog named Nasty as their mascot, and everyone took turns taking care of him. The night of July 4th was Barry's turn to take care of the pupper, so he left the celebration early. Since his shift fell overnight and Justin wouldn't allow the dog in their room, he pulled a cot into the hallway to sleep next to Nasty. Calvin was about 17 beers deep when he returned to his bunk that night. Just as he was falling asleep, there's a knock at the door. At 1 a.m. Guys, nothing good is happening when you're drunk at 1 a.m. You shouldn't be answering a text, let alone the door. It's now early in the morning of July 5th, and Justin is on the other side of the door, also drunk as fuck and twice as ugly, ready to continue pushing every one of Calvin's buttons. Annoying as he may be, somehow he talked Calvin into coming back to his room with him for another beer. Super idea. Okay, we're at 18 beers now. How are you still standing? Once in Justin's room, he continues berating Calvin about the ass whooping that he never received but Justin clearly needs. And then Justin tells Calvin how Barry had been boasting all day about how he'd knocked Calvin down a notch the night before. This was not true. Barry hadn't said anything to anyone about the altercation from the previous night, except to Calvin when they patched things up. Justin could see that Calvin couldn't stand the thought of word being spread that the same guy everyone was harassing for being gay had bested him. Justin says to him, "All right, soldier, we gonna do this?" To which Calvin just says, "Yeah." And that's when Justin hands him a baseball bat and says, "Well, go do it." Calvin, even in his stupor, doesn't see how this makes sense. He says, "What do you mean, go do it? I'm not going to go beat him up alone." He puts the bat down and lays in Barry's empty bed to try to get some sleep. But oh, Justin, you already know he cannot leave it alone. He brings the bat over and puts it on Calvin's chest. Calvin puts it down, and Justin brings it back again. Do you know how persistent you have to be to keep someone that drunk who actively wants to pass out awake? I don't know, because I can't be kept awake sober, but I would imagine you would have to be the highest level of annoying as fuck to accomplish this. Calvin, who was later quoted as saying he didn't feel like he had a choice, gave in. He picked up the bat, left the room, and went into the hallway where Barry was sleeping. He swung the bat at Barry's head. The first hit wasn't as hard as the ones that would follow. The first one woke Barry up. Groggily, he tried to fight back, but Calvin had the high ground. Calvin delivered blow after brutal blow to Barry's head and neck until he wasn't moving anymore. After this vicious attack, he just casually returned to Justin's room and handed him the bat. Justin said to him, "We're family now. This stays in the family." That's a direct quote. Like, who do you think you are, Al Capone or something? Shut up, you waste of brain cells. Justin washed off the bat while Calvin fled the scene, disposing of his bloody clothes in a dumpster. Justin went into the hallway, knocked on other soldiers' doors, and pulled the fire alarm while screaming, "Barry's dying." One soldier walked out and saw Justin cradling Barry's head, saying, "Wake up, wake up." Hollywood isn't calling douchebag, you can hang up the act. 911 was called, but due to poor service, it took over an hour for paramedics to arrive. Meanwhile, soldiers who lived in the Alpha module were faced with a gruesome sight. And this is your warning. What I'm going to describe is very graphic, so skip ahead a few seconds if you don't want to hear what they saw. Quoted from Rolling Stone magazine, groggy-eyed soldiers rushed to the scene and found Winchell with blood streaming from his left ear, his eye sockets turning black from cerebral hemorrhaging, his brain oozing from a gaping crack in his skull, and his entire head swelling to the size of a basketball. Paramedics arrived and noted that the hallway and Justin were covered in blood. The blood splatter suggested that this was an intense attack. As Barry was taken to the Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Justin, according to other soldiers, did drop the act and began flipping off the ambulance and screaming, "Let him die." Barry was treated for injuries to his left temple, forehead, jaw, back of the head, and neck, but never regained consciousness. After fighting for 30 hours, Barry died from massive head trauma. Calvin was quickly arrested after Justin identified him as the killer. So much for keeping it in the family, huh? Justin was also charged, but not arrested. For some reason that I cannot fathom, his only restriction was to stay on post, which is basically the Army's equivalent of sending you to your room. Not even your room, your house. Like, he can still go to the PX and the cafeteria and mingle with other soldiers. It doesn't make sense. Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. News of the attack spread quickly. The Army tried to say it was just a drunken brawl, in an effort to avoid the public learning that one soldier beat another soldier to death on base, which is supposed to be viewed as the epitome of safety. Where could one be more protected than surrounded by thousands of trained soldiers? It didn't work. A heartbroken Calpurnia came forward about her relationship and spoke about the harassment Barry had faced within the months preceding his death. In fact, when she learned of his death, the first thing she said is, "They killed him because of me." The Servicemen's Legal Defense Network got involved and concluded this was no drunken brawl. This was a premeditated attack. Calvin, already incarcerated, was charged with premeditated murder. 10 days after his initial interview, where he was allowed to walk free, Justin was arrested and charged with murder, accessory after the fact, obstruction of justice, and supplying alcohol to a minor. Calvin pled guilty to unpremeditated murder. During his plea hearing, he maintained that Justin had been the puppeteer and Calvin was simply the drunken puppet. He said, "I was just so drunk. I had no intention for him to die. It was a mistake. I wasn't mad at him for any reason. I had nothing against him," says the man who repeatedly spewed homophobic hatred in Barry's face. The prosecution wasn't here for his excuses, so they did not accept his plea and moved forward with the charge of premeditated murder. The defense argued again that Justin had provoked him and that the murder was not intentional. Though I agree that Justin is a complete and total shit stain and absolutely did provoke Calvin, I also agree with the prosecution's point that because of the massive blows, he had every intention of killing Barry. And he could have stopped after the first hit woke him up, but he chose to keep going. He could have stopped at the next blow or the next, but he didn't. He continued until Barry was left immobile with a shattering skull, gurgling in his own blood, which is just such a horrible, horrible death. The jury also agreed, and Calvin Glover was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison. As for the fuckwit, also known as Justin Fisher, in a move that outraged everyone, He was given a plea bargain where, in agreeing to testify against Calvin, he would plead guilty to the lesser charges of obstruction of justice and supplying alcohol to a minor. He was sentenced to only 12.5 years in prison. Both men were dishonorably discharged and sent to the Military Corrections Facility in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I really hate to tell you guys this, but sadly, Justin Fisher was released in 2006, and Calvin Glover was released in 2020. These two are walking the earth after taking a life out of sheer hatred, while a bright young man who could have gone on to do so much good in this world is in the ground simply for loving another person. Barry's murder sparked renewed debate about the effects of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and how it not only failed to protect LGBTQ service members, but created an environment where harassment and abuse were tolerated. On the day of Calvin's sentencing, President Bill Clinton made a statement that Don't Ask, Don't Tell wasn't working, and even called the policy out of whack. It was also the inspiration for the movie Soldier's Girl, which starred Troy Garrity, Jane Fonda's son, as Barry, and Lee Pace as Calpurnia. It premiered on Showtime on May 31st, 2003, just ahead of Pride Month, to continue shining light on the issue. It won a Peabody Award and a Gotham Independent Film Award. The film was nominated for 2 Emmys, 3 Golden Globes, 2 Independent Spirit Awards, 3 Satellite Awards, a GLAAD Media Award, and a TCA Award. It took way too fucking long, but in May of 2010, legislation was passed that repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was implemented in September of 2011. Finally, LGBTQ servicemen and women could live and love freely without fear of repercussion. Calpurnia has gone on to be an actress, musician, author, and activist for transgender rights. In 2002, she and Andrea James formed Deep Stealth Productions, which was launched to provide educational and entertaining content centering by and for transgender people. The two actually helped coach Felicity Huffman for her Academy Award-nominated performance in the 2005 film Transamerica. Calpurnia herself has received a Peabody Award, GLAAD Media Award, and Task Force Leadership Award. And that, my friends, is the heartbreaking case of Barry Winchell. That's all I have for you today, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Like next week when we will be discussing a case. I don't know which one right now because my schedule has developed a mind of its own. Oh no, it's become self-aware. Please make sure to drop a 5-star wherever you're listening. It really helps the podcast, and it makes me smile. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Criminally Nerdy Podcast, Twitter, X, whatever, at Crime Nerd Pod, or shoot me an email anytime at criminallynerdypodcast@gmail.com. Till next time, keep it nerdy. It'll go away. I can't. Maybe it's because of Lyme disease. Shit. The insect repeller could be a superhero name. Probably help if you fucking read what you wrote. I don't know none of this. Shush. Krebel? Soldierers? Ooh, rumple smooth skin. Just cracking my finger there. Blah, 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 blah. Alright, Penny, get it together. Talkingest dang thing you ever heard. Get Marvel on the phone. That is a cool name. Send in the infantry. John Deere. That's not it. This guy fucking sucks. Human? What is he cooking? What? Eat glass, dude. Oh, shit. Deers? Schmooze. Okay. Grilled. Chugging up the road on my tractor. That's the dumbest shit I ever heard.